right. This is Randy and Howard here again with the BaT podcast. We're super excited to be here today with an extra special guest. We have Reeves Callaway here, who needs no introduction from us. One of the greatest auto tuners, builders, and enthusiasts that we know. And we are super excited that he is part of the BaT community. He has commented and engaged with a few of the Callaway-oriented cars that have sold on BaT. And that has been really fun to see. And we've had several of our readers say, hey, if you're going to get people on the podcast, you got to get Mr. Callaway himself there if you can. And so we're super excited to have him here today. Reeves, welcome.
Thank you so much for that lead in. Hi, Randy. I'll try to disabuse you of any admiration that you have for me or the product.
Perfect. Well, we got a few minutes to do that. So we're ready for it. Yeah, that's no joke. That intro is no joke at all. We all shot, texts and emails around within the staff. I forget which car it was, if it was a actual Callaway Corvette or if it was some of the weirder, Alphas and Volkswagens that had Callaway parts on them. And somebody on our staff pinged me and said, Randy, Reeves Callaway is commenting on this Callaway car. What on earth is going on? So we definitely want to get your perspective of, maybe how you found BaT, how you heard that these Callaway cars were on the site, and what made you dive in there.
Hey, that's a good starting point, because at this point, after 40 years of building these automobiles in conjunction with GM, we have about 37 or 800 owners, either present or past. And a lot of those people maintain huge enthusiasm for the brand and the experience, and they maintain it by participating at Bring a Trailer, because the audience knows so much about the details of these cars. And I hear from the owners saying, hey, here's a car that we never knew existed, or here's a car that is a big conversation. So that's what got me involved in Bring a Trailer. But that was years ago. Today, those little flags pop up that say, hey, there's a car that you could be interested in or comment on. And I love doing that stuff, because there's no better way to get accurate information out there than to feed the enthusiast audience. That's how it happens.
Before signing on with you, I took a look, and I think we've listed 35 or 40 Callaway modified vehicles over the years. We got definitely a lot of questions for you. Definitely going to talk about Chevrolet and Corvette and that whole era. But I think I'd love to start before Corvette. Randy touched on it. You modified some Alfa Romeo GTV6 Callaway twin turbo. I think some Scirocco's had some Callaway parts on them. So I think we'd love to hear kind of how you got started and what those early days were like with Alfa and VW and any number of other manufacturers you were working with.
Well, great. Thanks for bringing that up, because, this is one of those stories of inventing something in the back of the house, in the garage, and having it mature to go from home garage to small industry. That's been the trajectory of Callaway cars. And one of the reasons was that I was always in pursuit of a relationship with an original equipment manufacturer. We always were trying to elevate ourselves into a position of being the authorized way to get more power or make a special model of the car. And all of those early cars that you mentioned, the Volkswagens, the early 924 Porsche, the BMWs, those were all in an attempt to establish a relationship. And it's very hard. Car companies are loath to want to have someone else work on their car. That's sort of tricky territory, very thin ice, right? But one day, if your stuff is okay and it's good and reliable and warrantyable and emission compliant and all that, you can establish a relationship with an OE, and that's what happened when Alfa Romeo North America took a very long walk on a short plank, I'm sure, and said, hey, these guys, Callaway, know how to do low volume production, make decent horsepower, meet the reliability goals, and be emission compliant at the same time. And they needed a car that could compete with the Maserati Biturbo. And like Jay Leno says, the only thing on a Maserati Biturbo that really worked was the clock. But no, it was true. Imagine trying to get 100 more horsepower out of an Alfa GTV6 and stand behind it from a reliability point of view, from an emission compliance point of view, and from a support of the car in the field point of view. And that's what they hired us to do. And we got ready in under 12 months, which was sort of record time. And the cars were well received. The initial reviews were terrific because the car was a ball to drive. It was a front engine, rear gearbox, 250 horsepower car instead of 150 horsepower. And it sounded great, typical Italian exhaust note. And just at the moment where we got the 30 or 35th car out the door in this very car by car kind of assembly process, Alfa Romeo closed the doors in North America. They went home. 1986 or so was the collapse of Alfa North America. And we're all standing there in Connecticut producing this very cool little car. And now we are essentially twiddling our thumbs. We were out of business. And we had, like I say, taken a long walk on a short plank to do this. But you know what happened? This proves my point that you're only as good as your last movie. One of those Alphas wound up as part of the competitive set study at General Motors, at Black Lake, at Milford Proving Grounds. And I got a call from Dave McClellan, then chief engineer, who said, we have this little Alpha here that is a dead ringer performance-wise for a 1985 Corvette. It 0 to 60 is almost identical, quarter mile almost identical, but it's half the displacement. How did you do that? Would you be interested in working on a twin turbo program with the Corvette? And of course, I should have had some fast talking answer all ready for him, but of course I didn't. And that's really how we got started with General Motors. It was their idea. And we decided to do a cooperative build of a small number of twin turbo Corvettes. You know what the original number was supposed to be?
No, what?
25.
Okay.
General Motors marketing came up with 25 cars would be sellable to the entire worldwide market of high performance buyers. And we said, really? 25? We were thinking much higher than that. And they said, no, we're going to say 25. So the first cars rolled out the door. They were received pretty well by the press, and the orders started to roll in because Chevrolet was offering to sell the car for us. And there were hundreds, maybe even up to 1,000 back orders at that point. And we quickly retooled for more than 25. We couldn't produce the cars fast enough. So it just shows that even the very bright folks at GM have real trouble when it comes to pick the number,
And then where did that end up heading, right? You say they wanted to commit for 25 and you had all these orders. I mean, were you able to ramp that and start producing those with them, or did you spin that out and do it yourself, or were the Callaway Corvettes all associated with them? There's lots of questions that jump to mind.
Yeah, this was a Chevrolet product. Yep. There was an RPO, a regular production option number. First time that one of those had ever been assigned outside of the corporation. So that was a bit of a milestone. And don't forget, we were doubling the price of the automobile. A Corvette in 1987 cost about $20,000 some dollars. And the option for the engine was another $20,000 because it was that much work to do it. So here we were selling a $50,000 Corvette in 1987, and that's why, of course, the marketing department had a hard time picking the number because, things like doubling the price of the car don't compute. But yes, we quickly retooled. We got it up to 188 cars in the first year, and 125 in the second year, and 100 and something. I can't remember exactly the numbers, but over the 5-year life of the product, the L98 based car, we made 509 of them. And the only reason that we stopped, frankly, was because the next generation, the LT1 engine, was not a good candidate for a big power increase. So we decided to draw a line through the bookending of a model makes it more desirable, I think.
And after the initial success in 85, as you mentioned, around 87, 88, I guess doing some research, Chevrolet, wanted to do a very official manufacturer contract with you to produce the 500 cars over a production run. When that occurred for you, did you say, wow, I've really arrived, I've got this contract in hand and Callaway's on the map? Or were you running around with your hair on fire trying to figure out how you were actually going to deliver on it?
Well, let me back up because one of the unique features or aspects about the relationship between Callaway and GM was that there was never any contract. This was an opportunity to work with, the world's largest car maker with the world's smallest specialist, hunkered away in a workshop in Connecticut, and there was no contract, and there never has been. This has always been a handshake. So here we are 40 years later, and we're still operating on a handshake. And look what's happened. For all of us who love building special cars, modifying engines, and doing high performance work, and what I've always wanted is the ability to offer someone a new level of performance, but still enjoy original equipment kind of reliability. Don't offer somebody a science project, but offer them something that is really stunning in terms of power. I mean, if you get into a 1988 or 89 twin turbo Corvette and go to wide open throttle for a moment in something like third gear, I almost guarantee you that you will lift the throttle at some point much earlier than you thought appropriate and say, you know what? I didn't really want to go that fast. It's a thrilling amount of acceleration that happens with 500 or 600 foot-pounds of torque available, especially given the traction limited nature of the size of tires on those cars. But that's why we never offer any of these things as do-it-yourself installations. We don't offer kits. We were in the kit business back in the Volkswagen days, and we saw the problems of that. The problems were that the cars didn't all turn out the same. And what we were after is a real reliable, accurate execution of every car being identical. So General Motors said to us one important thing in the beginning of the association. They said, keep good records. So we immediately started to put all of the owner and build information into a database. And you know what? Today, that database exists on all the Callaway personnel telephones. So if you have a VIN number of a car that you're looking at an auction or in a lot or in a transaction, all we have to do is hear about it. We know the condition of the car, who's owned it over its whole lifetime, what kind of warranty incidents it has had, sort of a general indication of owner care. It's a fascinating dossier that happens because a car can have many owners, and a good owner can have many cars. So you wind up needing to build a relational database in order to keep track of those variables. But today, the most valuable thing that we can offer the Callaway buyer of a vintage car is that we, chances are, know its history.
Yeah, that's very super interesting from a BAT perspective, because as you know, when we're listing these, we try to get as deep as we can on a lot of the history of them and where they've been. And there's claims made that sometimes are true and sometimes are not true out in the broader world. And we try to distill it down to what is actually happening and what is actually true. So anyway, that gives me some thoughts about what we could do with you on future Callaway listings. Maybe there's some fun ways we can work together there. But all of that makes me think of, I mean, you're kind of getting into this era where I discovered Callaway, and that mainly came from, the what I would call sort of the magazine cover era. Right? I mean, your cars started to be on the 200 mile an hour shootout cover on Road and Track and on Car and Driver, and I'm sure those were enormous publicity boons for you and your name and your company. And were those driven by GM and GM PR, who wanted to get these special boutique products, low production products out there? Or were those you guys and your relationships trying to get, Callaway cars to go up against, the best of Europe and that sort of thing?
Honestly, it was much more the men and women working in the Corvette group, which, as you know, is a much smaller subset of engineering. And they have autonomy and they have decision-making ability. And if there is goodness in a Corvette, it's because of the talent of those men and women, sort of separate from the larger corporation. But you're absolutely right. Those top speed shootouts were a huge opportunity for exposure. Don't forget, we never advertised the automobile. So our only road to being understood or being looked at was through PR kind of events. But I'll tell you, an interesting result of that was that the opportunity for going to win the top speed event, it was an annualized affair. There was one of those contests every year, either with Road and Track or Car and Driver or any of the Corvette magazines. And my complaint to Dave McClellan at GM was, look, it costs too much to build these top speed cars, especially if we do it on an experimental platform from GM, one of the X cars, because those cars have to return to GM and go to the crusher. So we would lose the car as soon as it became famous, right? So I said to him, look, here's an idea. Why don't we just build one car that can always win the event, but we won't let anyone know how fast it goes? So that's what happened. That was the genesis of the Sledgehammer. A car that would always win the event, but you could roll it back into the garage and bring it out next year and have it win the event, but just by a little bit. That was the strategy.
Yeah, but there was a lot more in the tank on those. You're implying that those could have been cranked up and put yourself way out in front of the curve. I wasn't aware of the sort of strategy that was going into it. It sounds like, were you on site doing that sort of thing, or were you controlling things from back at the mothership, or what was your role in those sort of events and those decisions?
My role was to lead the experiment. I was the driver and the builder. So the problem was you needed to test the car privately to find out ultimately how fast could it go. Before you handed the keys off to a journalist, you needed to know. Because don't forget, the objective was to only win by a little bit. It costs about $1 million to build one of these top speed event cars. And the problem, as they started to go very fast, as they started to go well over 200 miles an hour, was you were limited in the number of places where you could do that safely. And one of them was the Transportation Research Center in Ohio. And if you've never seen a 7.5 mile oval, there are people inside the middle of the oval running farms that I'm sure they don't know they're surrounded by an oval. I mean, it's that big. I mean, these are test tracks where the corners are neutral at 150, so you can go hands off into the banking at 150, and you don't need any steering input at all. But the trouble was, we got found out. Somebody leaked how fast the car would go. And then it appeared on all the covers of the magazines, 254.76 miles an hour. And you know what happened? Nobody ever showed up for a top speed event test again. Porsche,
That was
Ferrari, nobody. They all stayed home. The magazines were all pissed. And
Well, that's a function of victory, perhaps. I would love to know. I mean, whenever you modify a car to the degree you guys were doing, there are obviously a number of considerations to manage that additional power, specifically tires and brakes. So I'd love to know: did you become very friendly with the executives at Goodyear when you were, or another manufacturer, as you contemplated how to put it all together?
well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the key to being able to go fast is the tire. And nobody should attempt to do any of that business without having a real tire company support. So Goodyear was the OE supplier to Corvette in those years. And they didn't want anybody else on the car. And frankly, we needed a tire that looked exactly like a Goodyear Gatorback, but had a 300 mile an hour kind of safety margin. So they built that tire. They built 8 of them, and they assigned a different person to each one of the 8. And that guy had a small chain on his wrist that was tied to the tire. I'm exaggerating. But they sure didn't want anybody to see what that tire was all about. So the tires were very closely guarded. The minute they ran on the car, when the day's testing was over, they took the tires off and covered them up and put them away. But that just shows you how much of a key to going fast they were. They did a great job. We never had a single tire problem. And they confided in us afterwards that they had spent $1 million building those 8 tires.
So where did these sort of records and these numbers, I mean, obviously these top speed runs are really amazing, and there's a ton of publicity. So does that turn into orders for more GM product? Or where, I mean, you, like I said, that's when I discovered your name. I feel like your name was all over everywhere. The Callaway Corvettes just exploded onto the scene over those years where they were winning these shootouts. But what was the result for that? Was the result of that great for you in terms of new opportunity and volume, or what did it turn into?
I'm not sure if we could ever know how much those efforts helped the sales of the cars, because the country was headed into a recession from about 89 onwards. Things were not very rosy economically. And then there were fuel considerations, and there was it was not easy to sell cars that were getting progressively more expensive, especially if they started out as Corvettes. That was a little bit of a handicap from a price point of view. I mean, here we were delivering, some pretty exquisite technology that just by its nature costs a lot to do. Expensive materials and hot side components, difficult packaging, and required durability, even fuel economy and price figured into the whole equation. So I think the pride that we have in looking back on all of those is that we built those as best as they could be built. price was not a consideration. This was make it as perfect as you can make it, and someone will appreciate that. So that's what those cars represented. A high watermark for us, and I hope for GM.
That's very interesting. I think our audience would love to know, have Corvettes always been near and dear to your heart? What were you playing with back in the 1960s and 1970s that kind of led to all this?
That's a great point. We didn't know anything about Corvettes until Dave McClellan said, "Hey, take a look at this car." Our admiration from an engineering point of view was much more aimed at folks like Porsche, Mercedes, Audi, Volkswagen, and that's who we were trying to establish OE relationships with. But Dave McClellan was a brilliant organizer of the C4 version of the Corvettes, and they set the tone for what we have today. If the C4, C5, 6, and 7 weren't as great incremental steps as they have been, the C8 would not be as great an automobile as it is. And it truly is a great automobile. At this point in our career, we've worked for every car manufacturer on the planet, except the Koreans. And I can tell you that my experience in seeing behind the curtain and having an ability to drive first article automobiles from Porsche, Ferrari, Audi, Mercedes, you very quickly know when you have a good automobile under you. And I can tell you that the C8 is the leader of my personal opinion of the pack. To have that car roll out in the condition that it has, at the price that it has, and the readiness that it has in terms of maturity, I think Taj Yekter and his group should go down as an exemplary way to do this, especially considering the price point. Our race shop in Germany, where we build the GT3 cars for GM, is in the same town as Audi. And across the street is Porsche at Weissach. And down the road is Mercedes. So the joke is that there's something in the water. Because, hey, without a doubt, the best race cars in the world are built in that corner of the world. You cannot build a finer race car than Mercedes builds. And Porsche has been, showing the way for a lifetime. And Audi has such extraordinary engineering resources. When you're trying to stack yourself up against who's who in the car world, those are your competitors right there. So the fact that the Corvette GT3 car, the one that we homologate for GM, manages to win races against all three of those brands, I think that's our proudest moment.
I think that's amazing. And honestly, I didn't know too much about that program or where that it's located in Germany and all those sorts of things. Is that under the Callaway Racing banner or the GM Racing banner, or what is that? Tell people a little bit about your involvement there. Has that been a multi-year thing, or is that since the rear or mid-engine layout?
Oh, no, this is our 15th year of doing that. The problem with sports car racing has always been trying to achieve parity between brands, especially if they have disparate philosophy about what kind of car do they want to build. How on earth do you make them equal on the racetrack? Well, this class called GT3 has done that because the top 30 cars in the race next weekend at Oschersleben, I guarantee you they're all going to qualify within the same second. 30 cars, 6 different brands, 8 different brands, all qualifying within the same second. That's never happened before. And it leads to the world's toughest competition in GT racing. And if you haven't seen them on TV, go to gtmasters.com and hang on to your socks. What it does is it emphasizes driver talent because all the cars are dead equal. But boy, is it fun to explore the allegiance of the Porsche owner, the Audi owner, the Mercedes fan, the Lamborghini guys, the Bentley guys, and see who can win one of these races. It is really tough going. We have won the championship 4 times in 10 years. And my confidential comment is, if you really want to piss the Germans off, beat them with an American car. Especially since the American car was produced right in Germany, in their backyard. You want to hear a funny story? You may or may not want to put it in the podcast, your choice. But it's, do you know when qualifying happens at Le Mans? It's at midnight. That's when qualifying starts. You have 2 hours. So I think this is 94 or 5, our first or second time when we entered Le Mans with a Corvette. And we're standing right next to the Porsche motorhome as the clock is winding down, and Porsche's at the top. Porsche has got the pole position in the GT2 class. And all of a sudden, the Corvette pops up to the top. Boris Said is driving. It's his first time at Le Mans. He puts the car on the pole in the last 10 seconds of qualifying by a big margin. I mean, by 2 or 3 seconds. So I'm standing at the door of the Porsche race control motorhome, and here's Dr. Singer, Norbert Singer, and Jürgen Barth, the head of competition for Porsche. And I hear Singer hit the roof, and he yells at Barth. He says, Herr Doctor, was ist das Callaway Scheißtrick? Which means, what is this dirty trick, Callaway? Yeah? And Barth sort of thinks for a minute, and very quickly he says, Herr Doctor, das ist ein richtiger deutscher Rennwagen. This is a real German race car. Because the Corvette was made in Weingarten, all right? So he sort of saved his ass by saying that. But hey, you can't write this stuff, You cannot make it up.
Wow, no, that's fascinating. I didn't realize you were at Le Mans in the mid-'90s. That was obviously a really interesting time in motorsports. And, you mentioned you guys were there, Porsche was there. I think that was when McLaren had the F1 Longtail GTR. That was the year you were there. What was that like to be in the hot pit and in the mix at Le Mans in those days?
Well, we were a contender for winning the class, which had typically been dominated by Porsche. Don't forget, that was the GT2 class. McLaren would have, in the year that McLaren was there and won, they were winning for the overall. So we were not competing directly against McLaren. Boy, there is a lot to learn about international motor racing. The selection of drivers, your relationship with the ACO. I'm so grateful for that experience. That was a terrific thing. It almost killed, racing 24-hour races almost kills the teams. It's so hard, and there's so much sustained effort over so many months to just arrive ready to race a 24-hour race. So I have a lot of respect for anybody who actually pulls that off. We had 10 entries at Le Mans among cars that we would build and sell to race teams. And it's hey, if you say that you're going to make a great automobile, go to Le Mans, campaign it, and see how you do against the other folks in your class. That's the real, what do you call it? That's the badge of courage that you need. That's why Jaguar XK150 says on its badge, winner, Le Mans, 52, 53, 54. You can't do better than get that experience into your automobile.
That's some awesome stories. I love hearing about all that. I want to jump a little bit to present day and what sort of activities you guys have and what's going on. I know it sounds like you still have the handshake deal with GM and are working on their product. Are you doing exclusively GM work these days? Or I mean, you mentioned you've worked with almost every manufacturer under the sun. Is what is going on at your operation, and what is your involvement in it?
When you start to become heavily allied with a brand, you sort of lose the opportunity to work for other people. So once we became known as a GM house, then other opportunities disappeared. But the good news was, because of the way General Motors makes automobiles, anything with the 6.2 liter V8 in it became sort of home base. It's Corvette, it's Camaro, it's Suburbans, it's Silverados. It even goes down into the Cadillac CTS-V range. So that automatically broadened out our product line. And thank goodness that it did, because if you're going to make a specialist version of the Corvette and you do really well, you might sell 200 or 300 of those a year. But if you make a really great version of the Silverado, there's a chance to sell 1,000 plus of those. So that's what we went. That's why we went sort of broad reach in our product line for GM, and that's the basis of really all of our road car preparations is anything that has the 6.2 liter V8 in it. The hard part, the bogey of being in that business, is that you have to stand behind the vehicle with a very strong warranty. It has to not degrade fuel economy. It has to be emission compliant for its entire lifetime. And it has to meet all of the durability bogeys. Like the supercharger that goes on the car has to have 100,000 mile durability with no maintenance.
And all of those requirements you just listed to make a modern day car, would you say that the world was very different back in the late 80s when you did the initial program with Corvette? How has that evolved over the last few decades?
I guess my comment would be that things have become more stringent and certainly more enforceable. And the consequences of not doing a good job in the area of warranty or fuel mileage or maintenance or emission compliance, the consequences of screwing that up are very costly. So, we have a warranty system that allows the owner to see the car as transparent in the GM system. Normally, if you modify a GM car and go into a dealer, the warranty is blocked because they knew that you modified the vehicle. In our case, the warranty is not blocked, and it's treated just like a normal car. If there's any kind of discussion about whose problem this is, we have a warranty administrator at GM. We meet with them every quarter, and believe me, we go through every warranty incident that may be of concern. But you know what's interesting? Here's something that only became apparent to me after about 20 years of doing this. If you look at the warranty incident for the normal car and then the warranty incident for the high performance version of the car and lay the two over each other, you know what the result is? The result is that we cannot see a difference. We and GM cannot see a difference between the modified car and the standard car. It's within, experimental error, as they say. But those two lines are essentially coincident. And, Mark Royce called me on the carpet one day and said, how come we validate these cars at 400 horsepower? You're putting them out the door at 700 horsepower. How come they aren't all dead on the side of the road? And I said, well, here's a little secret. The man who spends the extra money for this version of the car is perhaps your best customer. He is certainly not a warranty abuser. He is going to take the best possible care. This car is his baby. And hey, everybody at Bring a Trailer knows that. You may find one wild man in a bunch, but in general, you're going to have people who are respectful of the automobile. And I think that customer needs to be sought out and rewarded. General Motors should harvest those people and say, this is our guy. We're going to sell him a Suburban in addition to his Corvette.
Can you tell us any story about the development of all those GM cars was there any times when you didn't see eye to eye with them? They wanted more power than you were willing to practically give a customer, or you wanted more and they said, no, we can't get, we'll people will be flying off the road left and right? Or when were you not what you guys want to be offering?
I'm only laughing because there were so few conversations about anything like that. Those guys have their hands full with a whole litany of problems and responsibilities. No one is telling us what to do. They're relying on us using some good sense. I mean, after all, this is sort of a control group, isn't it? So it's nice to see what happens in the extremes. And I think that information filters back to the corporation, just like it filters back from a race program. But no, there was never any, don't do this or be careful of this. There might be a little warning like, gee, we have a problem with alternators on the line, for some series of cars. Little helpful hints like that, but nothing about overall, don't give it too much power or anything like that. No,
Interesting.
You've mentioned a number of cars you've developed. You mentioned the Sledgehammer, which is kind of the top of the heap. There was the Supernatural, a number of other Callaway Turbo modified cars. I'd love to know which of all the cars you've been involved with stand out to you in the present day as being your favorite or the most memorable for one reason or another.
Sure, that's an interesting take because it's not always the biggest and baddest that winds up deserving mention. I look back over things like doing the Range Rover program for Charlie Hughes at Range Rover, and making the most powerful version of Range Rovers ever sold. This was in 1999. And we're not talking about massive power here. We're talking about 235 horsepower in a 6,000-pound car. But you know what? That's the car that I drive every day. I still have a 1999 Callaway Range Rover as a sort of a high watermark of Range Roverism. The other one that stands out is do you remember the Mazda Speed Proteges from 2003?
I do remember those. I was on your website and I was like, what on earth are there Mazda Speed cars even on the Callaway side? I didn't know you did anything with Mazda Speed, but what's with the Protege?
Well, we did the whole Mazda Speed program for Mazda. And we supplied the turbochargers, the intercoolers, the development package, the calibration software, the intercooling, and we sent all of those pieces to the 7 different ports of importation, where they were installed by people who would normally be putting on seat covers and changing out interiors, and we trained them all on how to do these things. The first year order was for something like 2,500 sets of these components, and they so quickly got the enthusiast market enlisted that the order was doubled. So now we had to make 5,000 of these things. And before the program was shut down for model change, we did another 2,100. So about 6,800 of these little Mazda Speed Proteges were flying around out there. And they were really fun because, they were powerful. in a hot hatchback kind of way, and they were not expensive, and you couldn't break one. We tried. We couldn't break them.
Wow, torque steer at the max, it sounds like.
Here's a good example. We asked Mazda what was the weak link in the chain. What was going to break first if we made too much power? And they said the main shaft in the transmission, in the gearbox. They said, don't go over 170 foot-pounds because it will break after that. And so we thought about it for a few minutes, and 170 foot-pounds at 5,250 RPM is 170 horsepower, right? But we said, well, how about if we make 170 foot-pounds at like 7,000 RPM? And they said, that's fine. It's not going to break. So we could make 170 foot-pounds anywhere in the RPM range. We didn't wind up releasing that for production, but isn't it funny that a mechanical specification of a component like that will determine the whole market positioning of the automobile?
Okay, so a lot of people listening to this, a question I'm sure they have is, what is the reliability and maintenance needs on your Callaway 99 Range Rover? Let's hear it.
Oh, you don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear that. Those cars were born in the garage, and I don't think that they will ever successfully extract themselves from the garage. It's just that those cars will nickel and dime you to death.
I guess it helps if you have Callaway Engineering Limited behind you running, the shop to take care of your Callaway Range Rover.
Well, the good news is that the Callaway parts are not the failure point. It's the other traditional stuff,
everything else.
Yeah, the AC, the electronics, the CV joints. Don't get me started, please.
So it may not be Land Rover or Range Rover, but I thought it'd be interesting. I mean, your approach has always been so engineering driven, and I love that. I've always respected and followed that. And who else out there, present day, do you have respect for from an engineering approach perspective? Like who's doing interesting stuff right now? Do you think either in your motorsports circles or in production and tuning cars?
Oh. That's easy. My hat goes off to Gordon Murray. Talk about admiration, experience, skill set, logic, and good reasoning power. Dr. Murphy is our guy. I'm an engine design guy, so my admiration goes towards the great engine designers, Mario Elian from Ilmor, Gordon Murray, Paul Roche at BMW, who's no longer with us, Hans Metzger at Porsche. It's a sort of a who's who list of engine designers. My great engine designer, Hans Hermann, responsible for the Callaway HH Indy engine, is certainly in that category as well.
That's fascinating. It's fascinating to hear those names and where those people are and what the impact that they have had. And then have the Callaway name in there amongst those. You must be very proud of what you've built over the years, and obviously all the effort that you've put forth and all these models. I mean, we can keep going on all the different models that you've touched, from a Protege transmission main shaft concern, to all the way, on the grid at the pole at the 24 hours. So just unbelievable variety and again, engineering driven perspective from you. And then, the fact that you're involved and care about what's going on at BaT and the future Callaway cars that we will list. We just really appreciate you being involved with our community that we have built and the way people are listing cars. It's really invigorating and helpful to see that you're in the community and on the website.
Well, Randy, the real truth is it's hard to get accurate information The automotive world is contaminated by inaccuracy and embellishment. And it's always great to have a chance to bring it back to, first article from the people in your audience who know what they're talking about. And I'm so amazed that there are so many people out there who really do know what they're talking about. They're not vapid comments. They're genuinely applicable. And I don't mean just about the Callaway stuff. I mean about stuff in general. I really enjoy, the great difference between me and the other car builders of history. I was at an auction the other day, and I introduced myself to the crowd, and I said, I have a huge differentiator between myself and the cars that we build and the cars that you're surrounded with here, everything from, Delahaye to Duesenberg. I said, I'm sure that I wouldn't be out of line if I pointed out that I'm the only one of the car builders in this room who's still alive. So, yes, it is nice to be part of that legacy. I hope that we're able to maintain that and wind up building some really great automobiles in the future.
Fantastic. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to talk about cars and BAT and history and sort of the Callaway legacy. So we will look for you on the website and look to do more with listing more Callaway cars.
Well, Randy, Howard, I think this is sort of a continuing story, so I would be open for round 2 anytime that you are.
Fantastic. We'll do that. Thanks very much. We'll talk to you next time.
Okay, man.